Coming up this week on the GCN Racing News Show, 4 of the most deserving world champions you could ever wish for. We'll look back at 4 days of cracking racing from Imola in Italy. The cyclocross season has also officially started, believe it or not, with the Rape and Cross in Lokeren. Plus, we'll look ahead to a week of racing that includes the Bink Bank Tour, Flèche Wallonne, Liège-Bastogne-Liège and the Giro d'Italia. First up though, the World Championships. We had 4 days of fantastic racing last week in Italy and 4 worthy winners crowned. Actually, 3 worthy winners because one absolute weapon won 2 titles in 3 days. More on that coming later on. But first up, the race that is freshest in our minds, the 260km elite men's race from yesterday. 3 teams controlled the race for much of the day. Slovenia for Roglic, Denmark for Fuglsang and Switzerland for Mark Hirschi. Ultimately, only one of them would get a medal. And that's because when push came to shove, it was the French and Belgians who dominated proceedings when it mattered. With 3 laps to go, the French put Peters, Pacher and Elizondo on the front, and that significant upping of the pace reduced the size of the group quite significantly. The first big attack, however, came from Tour de France winner Tadej Pogačar. He went on the last climb of the penultimate lap, building a lead of almost 30 seconds at one point in the race. However, he was unable to produce a second miracle in a week, and so the race basically all came down to the final climb of the race. How was the race won? Basically, through sheer power. Here is the moment Alaphilippe made his race-winning move. A 15% gradient after 250 kilometers raced on the big ring, dropping every other world-class rider in that group and then finding even enough power in the tank to solo to victory and stay clear of a 5-man chasing group behind. That's how. His gap hovered between 10 and 15 seconds for the final 12 kilometres of the race. He really had to dig deep there, but try as they might, the group couldn't quite close the gap to him, and Alaphilippe had enough time to sit up, raise his arms, and shed a tear or two before crossing the finish line. And I must admit, the emotion Alaphilippe displayed there, and after the finish, almost brought a tear to my eye too. It's been a really tough year for Alaphilippe, partly in living up to the expectation that he himself had built with his results and performances of last year, but mainly due to the passing of his father. Joe passed away in June, and you can only imagine how proud he would have been to see his son become the new world champion yesterday. He's the first Frenchman, in fact, to win the Men's World Championships since 1997. Back then, it was Laurent Brochard who pulled on the coveted rainbow jersey over his mullet in San Sebastian in Spain. And as Café Roubaix pointed out on Twitter, Alaphilippe became the first Frenchman to win on the Imola racetrack since Alain Prost in 1993. Very clever stuff. Now, I have said on a couple of occasions this year that I don't think Julian Alaphilippe will ever win a Grand Tour. Part of the reason I said that is because I don't want him to ride like a Grand Tour winner. I want him to always race like he did yesterday, with panache, laying it all on the line, risking losing to go all out for the win. Now, you couldn't say it wasn't without calculation, because when he did go, he knew it was the right moment. But there's an instinct about the way he races, and it's absolutely beautiful to watch. But whilst almost all of us were happy to see Alaphilippe take the rainbow jersey, I think a lot of us were feeling for Wout van Aert, weren't we? He was the favourite at the start of the race. He had the whole of Belgium rooting for him and 7-star Belgians riding for him. And you really felt that he deserved to win for the way he's ridden already this year, whilst Alaphilippe deserved to win for the way that he raced throughout last year. But it's about the day itself, of course, and Alaphilippe was just stronger on that final climb. Van Aert, meanwhile, almost inevitably won the sprint from the 5-man group behind relatively comfortably, and therefore picked up his second silver medal in the space of 3 days. And he's actually only the 3rd male rider in history to have won a medal in both the World Championships time trial and road race in the same year. The others being the Spaniards Miguel Indurain and Abraham Olano. Not bad company to keep. Third yesterday, in a photo finish, was young Mark Hirschi of Switzerland. He's basically been the revelation of this revised season, hasn't he? And I say that not to dismiss the achievements of Tadej Pogačar, for example, but we all knew his name before the start of the tour. Some of you will have heard of Mark Hirschi, but certainly not all. Have no doubt, though, that it's a name we'll be hearing a lot of in years to come. Third in the World Championships at the age of 22, That's no mean feat. Nor, in fact, is out sprinting Michał Kwiatkowski, the former world champion of Poland, finishing a frustrating 4th place on the day. Now, a lot of us were speculating as to whether it would be the riders who'd come out of the Tour de France who would be best prepared for the World Championships, or whether they'd be on their knees due to fatigue, and then it would be the fresher minds and bodies of the Giro d'Italia contenders who would have the advantage on the day. Well, we certainly got our answer yesterday, didn't we? 5 of the top 6 riders in the men's race not only rode the Tour de France, but won at least one stage of the Tour de France. The first rider across the line who didn't do the Tour was Jakob Fuglsang of Denmark. He finished 5th. And it just goes to show you, 3,500 kilometres of intense racing in the space of 3 weeks does wonders for your form. And also proves actually that Jakob Fuglsang is absolutely flying on the lead up to the Giro d'Italia. Not far behind Fuglsang was Alejandro Valverde of Spain. At 40 years of age, he finished in 8th place. Pretty impressive, even if we all know that he would have made the front group in his heyday. That is in fact the 11th top 10 result at the World Championships road race for Valverde, and in fact he won his first medal at the first time of trying in Canada back in 2003, when Tadej Pogačar had not long celebrated his 5th birthday. Absolutely incredible stuff. And now speaking of Pogačar, fair play to that man for igniting the race fairly early. Many Tour de France winners would have had a week of parties and very little training by this point after that victory, but he clearly remained focused, gave it a very good shot, and even if it ultimately came to nothing, it did allow Primož Roglič to sit in behind and eventually come home in 6th place. And we should give a huge amount of kudos to that man as well. Many riders wouldn't have even wanted to look at their bike for weeks on end after that experience last Saturday, let alone ride it, and let alone pick themselves up, dust themselves off, and pick up a top 6 at the World Championships. Just before we finish with the men's race, have a gander at this. I mean, just saying. Right, well in that case I will go sort of partly with head, but mainly with heart, and say Julian Alaphilippe in the men's race. 2 from 2. Unbelievable scenes, although I didn't predict the women's race, which we'll move on to now. There, for a 3rd year in succession, the winning attack came from a long way out. Now in our preview of the race, we did mention the fact that the Dutch team would be the squad to beat, but what we didn't realise was that Annemiek van Vleuten would be a part of that strength. She'd of course crashed at the Giro Rosa just a week before, fractured her wrist, but after consultation with the doctors decided that she would indeed race. Now the early part of the race was animated by a decent move that contained the likes of Mavi Garcia and Hannah Barnes, but the remnants of the break were swept up when the Dutch team lit it up with 2 laps remaining. And almost immediately after that, an acceleration by Anna Van Der Breggen saw her drop everyone, even Van Vleuten, despite her best efforts. And basically, from that point, everybody else was fighting for 2nd place on the day. On Thursday, Van Der Breggen had ridden and won a 32-kilometre individual time trial, and on Saturday she rode an equally impressive 42-kilometre time trial to the finish line in Imola. It was a stunning ride in every sense, not least because of how picturesque those helicopter shots were of her on her own on that crest of a hill. Absolutely stunning stuff, and I'm genuinely sad that we don't have the rights to show you that shot again here due to rights restrictions, but I'm sure almost all of you will have seen it by now. So, in the space of a week, Van Der Breggen won the Giro Rosa, the World Time Trial Championships, and the World Road Race Championships. Not a bad 7 days in the saddle, is that? Although it did leave me with one question. What's left for her to win?
Not much, but Paris-Roubaix is one, new for the women, coming up in quite a few weeks' time. But yeah, Flèche-Wallonne I think would be her next race, but she's won the last 5 years in a row. So yeah, multiple winner in that event. But there's not much that she hasn't won. She's the reigning Olympic champion. The individual time trial was a new one to add to her palmarès. But yeah, she's done everything.
Joanna Rousel on the breakaway there. And yes, Paris-Roubaix. That really would be the icing on a huge cake that is Anna Van Der Breggen's career, wouldn't it? And you've got to say that she'll start as one of the main favourites too. In the end, it was 1st, 2nd and 4th for the Dutch on the day. Van Vleuten managing to outsprint Longo Borghini of Italy, which was a feat in itself given her injury, and then 4th went to Marianne Vos. In the time trial, it was unfortunate in more ways than one to witness defending champion Chloe Dygert of the USA crash out. Firstly, because we didn't get to see the battle unfold between her and Anna Van Der Breggen. The American had been well up at the first time check, but Van Der Breggen went very quickly over the second half of the race. Secondly though, just because it looked like a horrendous crash and such a nasty injury in the pictures that some of us were unfortunate enough to see after the crash. Thankfully though, reports say that she broke no bones and even had no tendon damage, just a very deep laceration to the leg. Dygert herself has said that she'll be back very soon, and I've got no doubt that she'll be true to her word in that. Meanwhile, in the men's time trial last Friday, the pre-race favourite more than delivered the goods. That man was Filippo Ganna. Somewhat unbelievably, that was the first ever Italian winner of the Men's Elite World Time Trial Championships. And he was head and shoulders above everybody else on the day. He absolutely smashed it out to the intermediate time check and then maintained that advantage on the tailwind return leg. His average speed over the 32 kilometres, a shade under 53 kilometres per hour, which is going some, I can tell you. Wout van Aert, as already mentioned, had to settle for second and silver, whilst third went to Stefan Kung of Switzerland. Incidentally, 26 seconds separated second placed Wout van Aert from his compatriot Victor Campenaerts, who was down in 8th, and 26 seconds was also the margin of victory that Ganna had over his closest challenger. That, I think, just underlying how superior he was on the day. Right, we are going to move over to the dark side now, cyclocross. This season kicked off on Saturday with the Rappen Cross in Lokeren. Now, for those of you who haven't seen it, it is still available on demand over on Race Pass on the GCN app. Calling the race for us on the day were Jeremy Powers and Magnus Backstedt, who had the rather strange situation of commenting on a race which his daughter was competing in. I absolutely loved that.
And things are definitely on a smaller affair, as you see someone that you know very well.
Yeah, that's my daughter Zoe coming across the line. I believe she was sitting in about 17th place there in her first elite cyclocross race, starting on the last row.
That's fantastic. Yeah, she'll be happy with that. That's a great finish. Only four minutes down from the biggest riders in the world in this sport. That's a fantastic finish for Zoe today. So super happy for her.
You've not heard the last of that name, that's for sure. The winner wasn't exactly old either. Anna Van Alphen, 21 years of age, taking what was the biggest win of her cyclocross career so far. And guess what? She's Dutch. Surprise, surprise. In fact, Dutch women filled the top 5 places on the day. Manon Bakker, Lucinda Brandt, Denise Betsema and Yara Kastelein. Former world champion Sanne Cant of Belgium would have to settle for 6th. In the men's race, Eli Iserbyt began in exactly the same way that he did last year, with a win in his first race of the season. So the Belgian powered clear of the rest on the 3rd lap of the race and would solo from there to the finish, coming home 42 seconds clear of Toon Aert, with Iserbyt's teammate Laurens Sweeck in 3rd place on the day. What was quite strange to see and hear, or not see and hear as the case was the lack of crowds at the race. Not because, of course, they didn't want to turn up, but because they weren't allowed to turn up. And it made you realise just how much the crowds add to a cyclocross race. It was almost eerie without them. Hopefully, like the rest of the world, the cyclocross world will get back to normal before too long, but it certainly won't be this year. In just the last week, in fact, 2 rounds of the UCI Cyclocross World Cup have been cancelled. One of those in Besançon in France, and then also the most famous race on the calendar, arguably, Coxeda. And that is a real shame. Let's hope other races on the calendar aren't too affected, although that might be wishful thinking, unfortunately. Right, back to road racing now, and it is a packed calendar of racing over the next week. Starting tomorrow with the Bink Bank Tour, which is 5 days this year. Pedersen, Van der Poel, Krauw Andersen and Ackerman amongst the star names who will be competing there. On Wednesday, we will have both the men's and women's Flèche on. There, newly crowned world champion Anna Van Der Breggen will be looking to take her 6th consecutive win at the race. Whilst Alaphilippe would be after his 3rd, except that judging by his post-race interviews from yesterday, it looks like he'll be skipping it in order to concentrate on Liège-Bastogne-Liège. Speaking of which, La Doyenne, men's and women's, is this coming Sunday, and the day before that, the Giro d'Italia starts. It's all going on. I'll be back hosting the breakaway after each stage of that race, and tomorrow or Wednesday, we'll have our big preview coming out here on the GCN Racing channel with Connor Dunn, a man who competed at the Giro d'Italia not so long ago. Now, all of the races which I've just reeled off are live on Race Pass, but as ever, territory restrictions do apply, so please check the calendar to see what's available where you are right now. As ever, I am going to finish with a little bit of transfer news, and it's been Ineos Grenadiers who were the busiest over the last week, at least in terms of announcements. So 4 riders are heading there for the 2021 season. Tom Pidcock and Richie Porte were not huge surprises. There have been a lot of rumours about them. But I have to say that Danny Martinez's move from EF Pro Cycling was not something that I'd heard rumoured. He will add yet more strength in the high mountains to that team, as will the Belgian Laurens de Plus, who moves over from arch rivals Jumbo-Visma. The French squad Cofidis have signed 2 more riders, Simon Chinook of CCC and Tom Bowley of UAE Team Emirates, whilst Greg Mühlberger swaps Bora Hansgrohe for Movistar. The Spanish team are also apparently in the hunt for the signature of Miguel Angel Lopez, as are AG2R. Whilst neither is confirmed as yet, it does appear that he'll definitely be moving on from Astana next year, having spent his whole 6-year career with them so far. Okay, that is all now for this week's Racing News Show. Next week I'll be back with a packed Racing News Show going over all the races that I mentioned just a few moments ago. Don't forget also to keep your eyes out for the Giro d'Italia preview show and also this week's episode of the World of Cycling over on Race Pass. Our guest this week is our very own Connor Dunn. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.